UNSW is unique in pioneering education in Australia. David Gonski is the Chancellor, and he lent his name to the Gonski Review into school funding. And in the building behind me, there's both an educational psychology department and the AIM High program for student equity.
We are amateurs, Nick, absolute amateurs.
That's okay.
But we have some of the equipment because we can't always take a professional out.
Yeah, of course.
So we have to have the
necessary gear.
Yeah, but we've learnt a lot from watching you professionals. We have no idea about light or anything of, you know.
That's just the next level, though.
We play at that, but we've learnt a bit about composition and about some techniques to use.
Well, from the videos that I looked at, it didn't look so amateur.
They will have all been done by UNSW TV downstairs or somebody like that. There are a couple that we've done, but they're like 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think enthusiasm carries the day a lot of the way if you're just trying to inform people rather than necessarily have a broadcast to potentially millions.
And you asked about my PhD. I haven't looked at it since 2013, so I thought, I haven't a clue what I found. So I had to go back and have a little look about it.
You do remember the persistence though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So just to start off with, when I ask a question,
yeah.
I'm probably going to be cutting out my question
yeah.
and just using your answer.
Yeah.
So if you could kind of reiterate the question
yeah.
In your answer, even if you disagree with it or
yeah.
correct my assumption or something like that.
Okay. Okay.
So, for instance, what is persistence? Your answer would be persistence is
okay.
so and such.
Okay.
And just to start off with, so I can check the sound levels, I'll get you to give me a brief introduction. And yeah, the talking points that I gave you, they're fluid. There's not like real rigid answers from those things. The general gist of what I'm trying to do is link persistence to the latest version of it, which I think is grit, and I already spoke to Andrew Martin about that, and then looking at the work Aspire does and whether it's possible to teach persistence is the core that
okay.
what I'm trying to get at. Okay. All right. Okay, great. So, just to start off with, and Jardine,
do you want me to look at you?
Yeah, to look at me,
okay.
please, and we'll try and make it seem like it's a candid, casual conversation, just over a beer or coffee.
Okay, I could do with a beer.
Me too. So, just to start off with, can you please say your full name, introduce yourself, and start.
Yes. I'm Dr. Anne Jardine. I'm the director of the AIM High unit at UNSW.
And what is AIM High?
AIM High is the area of the university that has the remit for widening access in terms of encouraging students from underrepresented cohorts to look at university as a choice that they can make. So we work primarily with school students. We don't work with current students.
So what sort of cohorts does AIM High look to sort of include in tertiary education?
AIM High's primary focus is with low socioeconomic students, but within that, that's the broad group we work with. But within that, if we're working out in our regional schools, we're working with a lot of Indigenous students. Within our metro schools, we're working with a lot of refugee students or migrant students or students that don't have any tradition of coming to university. But we use the low SES category as a kind of catch-all, if you like. That's our main focus.
And Aim High, I understand, has a few arms underneath it. Can you tell me what they are, particularly Aspire?
Aim High consists of several areas, if you like. The main area is the outreach work we do through the Aspire program, and when we're focusing on years 11 and 12 through the U at UNSW program. So they're the programs that primarily work with school students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Then following on from that, we also look at strategies for alternate pathways. So we're looking at pathways that don't rely solely on ATAR to come into university. And we also have a research and evaluation arm to Aim High that is currently doing quite a bit of research into widening access and looking at how those students manage once they get to university, and very importantly trying to evaluate the programs that we have in place.
Okay, that's great. I'm just going to adjust this camera a little bit. Okay, great. So how many students come through Aspire, or do you work with directly and indirectly? How many schools, how many teachers?
We currently, in terms of Aspire, we currently work with about 56 schools, both in the metro area and regional New South Wales. We have somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 engagements with students every year, and probably work with about 6,500 students. So some of those students get multiple engagements in a year with us. We start with our regional schools, we start with kindergarten, and we work through every year group to year 12. In Metro, we focus more on the high school age group, and that's basically because of numbers. We can't manage the number of feeder schools that go into high schools. We do have a small primary project that works with years 5 and 6, and we're just trying a community model out in 2 areas of Sydney this year, and next year 2 regional areas where we have Aspire staff based in the community. So they're able to work with the schools in that community all the way from kindergarten, and they're able to work with people like the neighbourhood centre, with parents. So it's a different kind of model we're using. The regional project officers will be based in one of our high schools, and then we'll work up and down the area we work in, going into all the high schools and primary, along with the core team from Sydney. So what we're trying to do there is build up the capacity of communities in terms of looking at coming to university in a more intimate way, if you like, and a way that engages more strongly with the community. There are lots of upsides to that kind of model. The downside is it is expensive to scale up.
Does that suggest that it's not just individuals who make it to university? It's whole social structures, it's whole communities who send their young students to university, and no one makes it alone?
I think some students do make it alone, and I think that comes back to who they are as people. But I think that the more capacity you build in the community in terms of the support they get from an early age to go to university, the more success you have in actually turning around underrepresentation and addressing social disadvantage, educational disadvantage. I think there has to be some buy-in from the broader community. And by that I mean starting to get parents thinking about their kids going to uni, the professionals in the area helping getting the message out about the benefits of uni education, and also giving the schools some tools and some support in helping their students get there.
Is there things that you can identify between the individuals that make it alone and then building up communities to have the capacity to increase their educational potential possibilities, that you can clearly identify that it's just some individuals and then some sort of community correlation?
If I'm looking at my program, we haven't actually looked at that kind of evaluation. So I could only give anecdotal evidence from talking with teachers and from seeing students year after year after year. And I think the ones that are more likely to make it are those that have some kind of self-belief and have a level or grow a level of self-confidence. Those that have some idea of what they want to get out of coming to university. Now that there is some backup for that from the PhD I did, in terms of when I looked at the individual indicators of persistence, and I looked at what made students choose to go to university and choose to stay. Students from low SES backgrounds were more likely to indicate it was intrinsic motivators of self that encouraged them to go, rather than extrinsic motivators such as their family wanting them to go, or they didn't have a job so they thought they might as well go. They tended to be motivators more likely to be indicated by students from higher socioeconomic groups. So I think, while I can't give you any clear evidence, I do think that those most likely to succeed, until you build capacity in the community and it becomes an expectation, those most likely to succeed are those with those kind of traits. So our work is about trying to have that light bulb moment, switch the light on for students, so that they can go, I can see me there, and I know what I want to do there, and I know what I'm going to get out of going there. So, and I think at the moment, with a lot of outreach work, it's still at an individual level, but it is something that snowballs, and it is something that has a ripple effect. So, for instance, in some of our schools, where there might have just been 2 students in a year group going to uni, that has hugely increased, because they've got role models, and they're seeing themselves in the situation, if you like.
Yeah. That sounds a lot like also I think it's Carol Dweck from Stanford, who is working with growth mindset, that like the students who are down and out just because they haven't succeeded in the past, that there is a opportunity to still grow, and that like incremental improvements can happen, and that like failure isn't an indicator of like, or it's like not learned failure.
Yeah, so failure is something that you can learn from and grow from.
And then the opposite of that is like learned industriousness, that like when you learn to apply yourself and do work, then you can show that you can apply that in other ways, right?
I think I'm not familiar with Carol's work.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, from our perspective, in terms of the work we do, that there is a learnt element to the work we do, in that there is certainly quite a bit of evidence that's come out of places like the UK, for example, that to be successful in getting students without any tradition of going, getting them to university, you need to start early. So you need to build from kindergarten. It's too late when they're in year 9 or year 10 because they've already got the mindset. And there is some research in the UK that shows by year 9, students have already made up their minds whether they can go to uni or not. And it's very hard to change that particular mindset. So for our work, there is a lot of evidence, growing evidence, that it's got to be longitudinal and sustained. So you've got to start really early and you've got to build on that in a sustained way.
And how do you cultivate the sort of long-term goals on an individual level where each student has different goals, different aspirations? How do you sort of cultivate that to be like, you notice in kindergarten that a child has a particular interest in one subject or regard, or a particular passion in school or extracurricular activities. How do you implement a program to push them towards the top end, or capitalizing on that as a long-term goal in education?
In trying to cultivate individuals' interests, what we try and do is give multiple opportunities to engage with university and to engage not only with the place that is a university, but also the offerings. So what we don't do in the early years is focus on an individual. We focus on a group, but give lots of different opportunities. When it comes to further up the school life, so when they are, say, from year 9 onwards, then what we try and do is provide more targeted experiences for students. So, for instance, we would bring them on campus, or if it's our regional students, we would bring them to Dubbo, and we would offer multiple workshops in a number of areas. So it could be a medicine one, it could be a science one, it could be a business one. And what they choose to do is up to them. So what they're then doing is choosing what their interest is or what their interest may be. We also try and give individuals, for even further, some individual experiences at uni. So if we know that somebody's particularly interested in law, for example, we will look at what we can give them to help them crystallise whether it is an interest or whether it isn't. A lot of students come into uni, I think, not clearly knowing what they want to do. And for some, that's part of the journey, part of the exploration. For others, it's off-putting and it means they drop out. So we look at a variety of things that we can do for students, which means that in any one school there is a core program, but there are also components that are specific to the school's needs or the individual needs of a student that the school has asked us to do something for.
Do low SES students get as many second chances as affluent students? It seems like there are so many points along this journey that a student could fall through the cracks and make one mistake in terms of not doing well in the HSC, or in first year exams, or any point like that where they fall off the path of higher education and therefore don't get to capitalise on their potential.
In terms of low SES students getting as many chances as their higher SES counterparts, I think in terms of accessing university, no, I don't. And I think that is because they don't necessarily know how to navigate the university systems. Whereas I think those with what Bourdieu calls social capital, do know how to navigate the systems. So, for example, if they do poorly in the ATAR, they don't necessarily know that you could come into a course at one university and look at transferring at the end of the first year, for example, or you can look at going to TAFE and coming in through that avenue. There was some research done in Melbourne a little while ago now, which actually showed that TAFE was not a good avenue for low SES students, but a good second avenue for the higher SES students coming in. So I think in terms of access, no, they don't get as many opportunities. In terms of once they're here and drop out, that's an interesting question, and I suspect that may depend on what type of university they go to. For instance, if they come to a university such as a GO8 uni, the retention rate of low SES students is equal to that of the rest of the student body in the main. So they are obviously taking their opportunities once they're there at the same rate, if you like, as everybody else. For other universities, the retention rate can be lower. There's no clear evidence of what those students then choose to do, whether they come back later or whether they just don't come back at all. And the jury's out on that this is one of the evidence gaps, I think, that exists in Australia. And part of that is because of how we track students, if you like. In a lot of countries, students have a unique identifier that enables you to track when somebody comes back in, and we have no mechanism.
It sounds like it would need to have a sort of 7-up study where you check in on them every 7 years. And
I think that would be, a 7-up study would be really great, I think.
The sort of top-down, let me just check whether that buzzsaw is affecting this too much. The sort of top-down approach of, I guess it's like economic funding, where you fund the bottom percentile or low SES students so that they can increase their educational outcomes. That's at core what the Gonski review into school funding also did. Are there many correlations? Do you see this as like a micro version of what that was trying to do in big picture in Australia?
The Gonski reforms were very much about putting funding into those schools where they didn't have the resources, which are the low SES schools. So I think the link between what we do and the Gonski funding model is that we're in the same space. So we're in the schools that are the most disadvantaged in the state often, and those are the ones that Gonski identified as needing most help. I think in terms of resources, we are not trying to fill the gap, which the Gonski funding was, but we're trying to value add and support the schools in filling the gap, if you like. So we do actually put programs in specifically to support the academic enrichment of students, which is where some of the gap lies, and we do target other gaps that are known to us. For example, in our regional schools, there is often not a dedicated careers advisor in the school who has a careers advice background because funding doesn't allow it. So what we look at doing is putting in careers resources and help for the teachers to actually be able to support their students. And that's the side that we weren't doing earlier, but we're now building. We've got another project at the moment that is building computer literacies. And how we're doing that is we're doing some targeted professional development for our regional teachers, and we're running coding classes for students, that primary students, that the teachers will then be able to build on from the professional development we're doing. So while we're not saying, okay, this school's lacking a computer teacher, so we're going in and putting one in, we're trying to support them in different ways. And certainly just in terms of the Gonski funding, we see every day the importance of that funding and the huge positive effect that funding's had. Interestingly, in terms of Aspire, we existed before that funding.
Right.
But where it has helped us, I think, is focus on what we can do at a more micro level. It's always interesting to use the term Gonski because he's our Chancellor and he's a great supporter of the Aspire programme. So he's a hero in our schools and a big supporter of our programme.
Thank you for saying so. That's what I really wanted you to be able to say as well, because I don't know whether I need to articulate it myself in a piece to camera or just use that grab from you.
He's actually hosting a cocktail, an event for us in December where it's a little bit of a celebration for Aspire, and if I'm going to be honest, a way of potentially getting people interested in investing in the programme.
Well, that was part of the Gonski review, right? The academic philanthropy.
Yes. David Gonski is very big on philanthropy, and of course he's got the Schools Plus program, which Schools First. Can't remember the name, but the program where he and a group of like-minded business people are looking at supporting schools outside the government funding. Mm-hmm. But he is a big supporter of Aspire, and we're very grateful for that.
Do you see the education moving towards a more individualized or self-directed, student self-directed future, so that each student can identify their particular interest, and that can be cultivated by a teacher or a mentor or somebody who can keep them on that long-term goal that they set out for themselves early on?
In terms of self-directed education, that for individual students, I think that's quite an interesting concept, because I think that forms part of what they term the 21st century skills, which include things like resilience and being able to manage self. I think self-directed education would be brilliant. I think that we should have a more individualised educational process for students. I guess where I would struggle is how we would resource that. We would certainly have to revolutionise, I think, the education training of teachers, and I don't know. I've probably not thought about it enough, Nick, to know how we could resource that to go forward. But I think building skills like persistence, resilience, managing yourself are really, really vital for school students, and to build success into those, the chance of success for those individuals. I am a great believer in building resilience and building persistence, because I think no matter who you are, you always have barriers that get in the way, and I think that individuals need those skills to get over those barriers. There is, again, both anecdotal evidence and evidence from the UK, and I'm not sure whether the grit theory provides evidence too, that students from low SES quite often show more resilience than students from higher SESs when it comes to how they cope with university once they're here. And certainly I think that shows in things like the results that they get. Often there is some evidence out of Melbourne and Monash that shows that students from low SES backgrounds who come in with lower ATARs actually perform once they get to university at the same level or better than those from higher SESs who've come in with higher ATARs, that they cope better with going into the university environment. Our teachers also tell us often that they believe their students are more resilient in terms of overcoming the barriers that they need to get to places like university.
Do you think it's possible, or are there examples of teaching persistence, resilience, grit, or are these things that each student has to learn and then try and transfer and apply to education?
I'm not sure I know enough to know whether it's possible to teach. My gut would say yes, it is. That if you start early, I believe yes you can, and I think there are activities and things that can be done in the classroom that help build those things. We've actually just done a little website called Paths for 21st Century Learning, and part of that we went and spoke to, or the project officer who developed that went and spoke to psychologists about resilience being the most obvious one, and how we could build some activities around that. So I think there are things that we can do within the teaching environment, learning environment, to promote those. Now, I also think that naturally some people, because of their personalities, will have more than others. But certainly I think yes, my gut would say yes, that it can be taught.
Great. That's the final point that I had that I really wanted to cover. Is there anything that you particularly wanted to share that you don't think we've covered yet?
I think you've been pretty comprehensive there, Nick. And I've actually really enjoyed talking with you.
Me as well. If you recall me before you went on leave, I sent you those links to Malcolm Gladwell's podcasts, Revisionist History, where 3 episodes was dedicated to education, and the first one was on the broad theme of the individual, one example of a low SES kid who manages to get recognised and sort of mentored, and is, has like a genius level IQ type of thing. And Gladwell is talking about how that's the exception to the rule. Like a lot of these kids don't get found.
It is the exception to the rule. That's absolutely right. That those individuals who through luck or happenstance or somebody somewhere taking a bit of an interest, unless you have programs like Aspire, are the exception. And it's interesting that we have a leading academic here who will talk about the one teacher who made the difference for him, and that one teacher took an interest and got him to university when in fact he was headed for working in a pub, and now he's a top academic in a leading institution. So it only does take that, but that's very much at an individual level, and what we need to do is build it at a systemic level.
Well, that's the second episode then looks at institutions and how there are certain universities in the United States where they don't have, if you compare 2 liberal arts colleges, that are pretty similar in size and ranking. One has a gourmet chef with for the dining hall experience, and it's incredible, right? And the students are constantly experiencing new cuisines, and it's like akin to the learning experience. And then another university has dismal cafeteria food, but the money that they don't spend on that is spent towards the Pell Grant sort of students who they're sort of trying to institutionalize or find these kids and provide more opportunities, because it obviously costs money to give a child from a low SES background a full academic scholarship and board and tuition and all that sort of thing. So then are there, do you think that's comparable to here, that there are universities that are spending money on new buildings rather than filling the buildings with diverse students to broaden a learning experience?
In terms of where universities put their funding, universities are driven by funding. So I think when there's a big carrot, like the funding that came out of the Bradley reforms for equity, all universities will find a will to do things like outreach. I think when it becomes more interesting is where funding starts dropping or ceases, and I think then some universities will make decisions that outreach is not their core business. My own belief is that for every university in this country, outreach is part of their core business. We have, as universities, a social responsibility to make sure we don't leave any part of society behind. And I think some of the political upheavals we're seeing in the world is because, part of the reason is because we are leaving parts of society behind. Not just universities, but the haves are leaving the have-nots behind. I actually think that universities should not only look at what they're good at, research, teaching, but also what they're good for in terms of what they give back to society that funds them. And I think part of that is the social responsibility of assisting all parts of society to have social mobility and gain from the benefits of a university education.
You're saying almost like exactly the same things that the academics were saying in that episode themselves about there is, because they are like government subsidized institutions, they don't pay tax, they are supposed to be giving something back, not just taking.
I strongly believe universities should give back.
The final episode was about academic philanthropy and showing how some philanthropists donate to the sort of more recognizable group of eight or Ivy League kind of equivalents, because they're the sexy institutions that you can see at the top, and they hope that that will then trickle down through society, whereas the opposite end, there's an example of one philanthropist who donated to a lower university, sort of those like community college type things, or maybe not exactly like a TAFE, but like it's got the lower SES students, and that's a sort of bottom-up approach where then Gladwell compares it to basketball versus soccer, that if you have one star player, like a Michael Jordan, and you give the most money to him, he can play the whole game basically by himself with barely any support from the four other players on the basketball court on his team, whereas soccer has 11 players aside, and you only need the worst player to make one mistake, and you lose possession of the ball and can lose the game. So he compares that as the funding dilemma. I haven't even found how that might apply in Australia yet. Does anything spring to your mind for?
The question of philanthropy in Australia is quite interesting, because I don't think we have the same tradition for philanthropic gestures as certainly the US has, and possibly the UK has. I think philanthropy is an area that's growing here, if you like. certainly the philanthropy that does occur follows the GO8s. I think that those lower, those universities where it doesn't have such an elite view of the world, philanthropy is not likely to go at the moment. Whether it should, I don't know. I think GO8s actually have a strong responsibility, perhaps a stronger responsibility than others for encouraging social mobility. And if that's through philanthropy, that's fine, I think. The business of government funding versus philanthropic funding is the tension between that is quite interesting. In terms of Aspire, for example, we've kept going for 10 years through a mixture of the funding we've been given by the government, and we've won from the government, and we've been able to, because of our results, win quite a bit. But we've also been able to garner philanthropic funds from corporate organisations too. So we've benefited, I think, from being a GO8 and being able to gain funds from being a GO8 and then putting them into our outreach. Currently, UNSW is putting a lot of money into Aspire too. So as the funding from the government fell, UNSW has stepped up to the plate. And I think part of that is because the new strategy 2025 has a strong social justice element to it. So this university is looking at how it does show what it's good for, not only what it's good at. But I think the more philanthropic funds come into outreach work, the more we can do. And conversely, the more we show we do, the easier it is, I think, to get philanthropic funds in. I think some universities don't necessarily show what they do well enough to encourage those philanthropic funds to flow in. There is also a bit of an attitude in Australia that what we at universities do should be government funded full stop, whereas I don't think that exists in the US, for example.
It's funny, I've never really done any finance or economics reporting. I find Australian Business Review confusing, but just hearing you talk about the funding model switching around and government decreasing, but then UNSW increasing, but now the Australia Council has donated, awarded UNSW more research funding than almost all the other universities combined. So it's like just moving around funds from one to another, and then to try and keep a level playing field, it seems.
The funding in higher education, I think, is very, very difficult space because it does move around so much. And outreach funding is one of those movements at the moment. We're not quite sure where outreach funding is going. There's been a review of the higher education participation program, which is where most of the equity money comes from. We don't know the outcome of that review, so we don't know what the government will do as a result. And not all universities are choosing, I think, to do what UNSW's done in terms of funding the gap. I don't think that that's sector-wide. I've been very lucky. The program, as I said earlier, the program has the support of David Gonski. It also has very high-profile support from Ian Jacobs, who's our current Vice-Chancellor, and who recently came out with me to Lightning Ridge and our other regional schools to have a look at those communities and what we did. And for a Vice-Chancellor to spend 4 days out on the road was a big thrill for us, and quite I think says a lot about what he thinks about the social responsibility of a university.
Just finally, I'm curious about what indicators you see happening right now that you think will
sort of coming together now, and it's going to become the dominant movement in education.
In terms of indicators, are you talking about school education or university education?
Well, for instance, the self-directed learning thing is what I was seeing.
Okay.
I was curious about, which you can sort of see that there are. It starts off from we need smaller classrooms so each teacher can focus more on each student, and then it starts to be like hinting at that the teacher will be more like drifting amongst students rather while they're sort of each working on their own projects. That's perhaps what I was thinking is going to be the future of education, and a few educational psychology experts have told me that's what they think as well. I'm curious what you think is the next push initiative reform in education.
In terms of the future of education, I think we need to move away from what I have seen for the last few years, which has been a conformist attitude towards education. We put in national curriculums and we all go down similar paths, and we are driven by results such as the NAPLAN scores and ATAR, and education has become a production line, if you like. I would want to see a move more towards education being about the individual. I really like some of the work of Ken Robinson, and his belief that we should be, for example, tapping into creativity, and that traditionally education flattens that and squashes it, and as a result we are poor, the results are poorer and society's poorer and the outcomes are poorer. So I think an individual approach would prevent that kind of thing happening, because we wouldn't be looking at it as a kind of sausage factory where we are driven by external factors such as NAPLAN. And I actually think by working, allowing a more individual approach, we wouldn't even be worried about NAPLAN, because the scores would go up anyway. So I hope the future of education is about the individual and not about external factors.
I hope so too. I just heard in the news just before coming here though that Simon Birmingham is looking to implement it was year one literacy testing from the UK. So that's kind of the opposite end of what we're saying.
Yeah, I know, and we hold such, or politicians and perhaps media hold such store by NAPLAN and ATAR, and they're one indicator that puts teachers in a position, I think, where they have to teach to the results rather than teaching to the individual. So while I'm not surprised our politicians are still looking at that kind of factor, it disappoints, because that's not what education is. That's not what education's about. So,
great, that's everything. That's the perfect
great
line to end that on. Thank you so much, Anne.
No.